In this video, we wanted to talk about RV refrigerators. There's a lot of different options out there, and while it might make sense just to take a regular old refrigerator you'd use in your house and use it in an RV, there may be a reason that you'd rather use a different type depending on what you're going to do with your RV. So there are four basic types of refrigerators used in RVs. The most common type that you see in a lot of RVs is the propane electric refrigerator, also known as an ammonia absorption refrigerator.
The second type, and becoming more popular, is the standard residential refrigerator that you would find in a house. They just bring it into the RV, plug it in, and there you go.
The third type is a DC compressor refrigerator, similar to the residential style fridge, except designed to run on 12 or 24 volt DC, so you can plug it directly into your batteries.
The final type, and less common, is the thermoelectric, also known as solid state refrigerator.
So the gold standard in RV refrigerators for a long time was the propane electric ammonia absorption refrigerator, and it works on both propane and electric, and as the name states, it uses the chemical ammonia in the cooling system to do some crazy evaporation, condensation that actually causes cool from heat. You actually use propane to heat a certain portion of the fridge and it cools the other portion. They're kind of complicated in that manner and typically more expensive for the amount of space that you get in them than a regular refrigerator, but there's a lot of reasons that they work really well in RVs.
This is the type of refrigerator that we have, and they're easily identifiable that when you open the door, you'll see a whole bunch of metal fins in the back of the refrigerator, and at the top you'll be able to select whether you want to use it on electric or gas.
So this type of refrigerator is commonly used in RVs because they don't need very much electricity, if hardly any at all, just a little bit to open some valves and such, and they can run directly on propane. The beauty of that is that you can be plugged in and have it on electric mode, and when you unplug and drive away, they just keep operating. They switch over to propane automatically. This is great for boondocking as well. If you're going to spend a lot of time off grid, you don't really have to worry about power at all because the fridge will just keep doing its thing as long as the battery has a little bit of charge in it.
And as long as you have propane.
But they're typically very efficient on propane. We boondock a lot, and we've had circumstances where we haven't really used the propane other than cooking, and we've used, let's see, we have 40-pound cylinders, we've used maybe half a tank running the fridge and cooking for an entire month. So I think they're pretty efficient on propane. However, they're not quite as efficient on electric compared to their residential style compressor relatives. Another pro to this type of refrigerator is that it rejects all of the heat outside. There's fins in the back, and you'll see a vent on the outside of the RV, and any heat that it's using to cool itself and heat from the refrigerator, it's basically a heat pump, is rejected outside, so you're not putting that heat inside the RV. If you're trying to keep it cool in the summer, that can be more of a heat load and make it harder to keep your RV cool. If you are in hot weather, these types of refrigerators sometimes don't cool as well as the compressor relative either. They really kind of swing depending on weather. Really hot weather, they might not be as cold, and really cold weather, you might wake up and find your entire refrigerator frosted over. They do have some control, but it's just not as good, so it's definitely a con to this type of refrigerator.
Yeah, our ice cream is usually softer than we'd prefer.
It works though. It stays frozen, but it's not rock hard like you'd find. Our freezer typically hangs around 14 to 20 degrees, whereas a residential style usually it'll sit around 0. This type of refrigerator also requires a little bit of maintenance because it has an open flame running on propane in the back. That burner needs to be cleaned occasionally, and you also need to make sure that nothing piles up around it. I also like to stress that these refrigerators need to have this maintenance done because a lot of people neglect them. A bird gets in there and builds a nest or something, and that open flame can actually catch something on fire. These types of refrigerators, neglected maintenance is one of the #1 causes of RV fires. So you definitely have to spend a little bit of time and know your refrigerator and make sure to keep it clean.
Yeah, we actually met some people in Idaho Falls who had just lost their entire RV to a fire caused by that. So it's a real threat.
Lastly, a con to these refrigerators is that they need to sit mostly level. If you're sitting cockeyed or you're letting it run while you're not using the RV and it's crooked, that could actually cause damage to this type of refrigerator. So you need to make sure that your RV is pretty level to use a propane electric fridge.
So now let's talk about residential style refrigerators. This would be the same thing as what you would find in your house. It plugs into electric and runs solely on electric. A couple of pros and why they're getting so popular is because they're obviously larger. A propane electric refrigerator typically is smaller than your standard refrigerator in your house, but if you're going full time and you want that full fridge space, this is really a popular option. You can also get them in stainless steel or, fancy looking, bigger freezer. A lot of times they'll have ice makers, which are very nice features to a refrigerator that you wouldn't find in the propane electric. And as Tom said before, they stay very cold and aren't as susceptible to the outside weather temperatures. So your ice cream is going to stay nice and hard. These refrigerators are great if you're going to be plugged in at a campground all the time, but if you want to go off grid, the cons of these refrigerators are that they only operate on AC power. Since your batteries work on DC power, you have to have an inverter to convert it to AC. That conversion is less efficient, so your batteries are going to drain pretty quickly. To continue operating them, you're going to need to have a solar array or a generator that you run pretty frequently to keep your system charged. So if you don't have those systems set up, these refrigerators aren't the best if you're going to want to do a whole lot of boondocking. Another con to these refrigerators is that they reject the heat that they create inside the RV. So if you are in hot weather conditions, your RV AC system is going to have to work just that much harder to cool down the RV. Lastly, these refrigerators tend to be heavier, and so you'll have to take that into consideration when you're looking at your gross vehicle weight rating and how heavy you are.
So the third type of refrigerator is the DC electric refrigerator, and they're basically very similar to the residential style in how they work. They have a compressor and they use a gas system that they compress, but they work on 12 or 24 volt DC. These types of refrigerators typically are a little bit smaller. They look more like the propane electric refrigerator, but you can get them in full size. In fact, you can actually do a residential conversion to one of these DC types of refrigerators. The pros that you get with the DC is they're much more efficient on DC than your AC refrigerator, and you're going to be able to run on your batteries a lot longer. You're not going to need as much power to keep them operating. Another pro to this type of refrigerator is you're going to get the same cooling capability that you get with the residential style. Your ice cream's still going to stay rock hard, and you're not going to be as susceptible to weather like the propane electric fridges. These types of refrigerators are typically a little bit more expensive than your residential style. A really common name that you're going to hear in the 12 volt DC refrigerator game is Dan Foss, the Dan Foss compressor. I'm guessing Dan Foss invented this thing. A very efficient compressor, and a lot of them work on both DC or AC. So if you're plugged in, it can work directly on alternating current. I like to think of these refrigerators as something that kind of blends the line between a propane electric and a residential electric. You get kind of the best of both worlds there. They're very popular in residential homes that are off-grid as well, because a lot of them run DC systems for the efficiency of it and being able to pull directly off your batteries or solar system. Although these are more efficient, typically for boondocking, you're still going to need to either run a generator or have a decent solar array, although it's going to be more efficient than your residential style. So again, the propane electric is still a lot easier in that regard. They can run a long, long time without draining your battery systems.
So the fourth and final RV fridge that we're going to talk about is the Thermoelectric or solid state refrigerator. And I don't know much about that one, so I'm going to let Tom tell you about it.
So these types of refrigerators aren't very common to use as the primary refrigerator in RVs, but a lot of times they're used as a secondary refrigerator, kept in the basement or something. A lot of manufacturers will put a second fridge that pulls out from the basement or a freezer in there, and a lot of times those work on the thermoelectric principle. Thermoelectric cooling uses a solid state NPN junction thermocouple basically, and when you apply power to it, it gets cold on one side and hot on the other. And if you put a fan on it, you can blow that cold into something and reject the heat on the other side. These only have limited cooling capacity. They don't get super cold, and they're very susceptible to weather, even more so than the propane electric. On a really hot day, they're not going to get as cold. On a really cold day, they're going to freeze. While RV manufacturers don't typically put these in RVs, I've seen some people put them in personally, but I wouldn't really recommend them, as the technology just isn't quite as good as the other types of refrigerators out there.
So this has been our overview of RV refrigerators. There's a lot to it. We just kind of touched a very high level. So if you guys have any comments or questions, please leave them in the section below. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love to have you along for our journey.
Thanks for watching. We try to put a video up every week, so hopefully we'll see you next time. Bye.